The autumn wind whispered through the withered cornfields as evening descended on Willowbrook Farm. October 2023. The Mason family's century-old homestead stood weathered but proud against the rolling hills of rural Pennsylvania. 3 generations, 8 souls in all, had worked this land through drought and plenty, guided by a simple philosophy that honest labor and family loyalty could overcome any hardship. None of them could have imagined that the rusted metal door, hidden beneath decades of hay and forgotten tools, would shatter their quiet existence and unearth secrets that powerful men had killed to protect. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 17-year-old Jackson Mason wiped sweat from his brow as he drove the final nail into the barn's newly repaired support beam. The old structure had weathered countless storms over its 112-year existence, but the recent tornado that had swept through Chester County had nearly claimed it. His father, Robert, a third-generation farmer with calloused hands and patient eyes, inspected his son's work with quiet approval. "Good job, Jack. Your grandfather would have been proud of that craftsmanship." Jackson nodded, satisfaction warming his chest as he gathered his tools. The barn had always been special to him, not just a place for equipment and livestock, but a living archive of his family's history. Every beam and board told stories of previous generations, their struggles and triumphs etched into the very wood. "If we finish clearing the north corner tomorrow, we can store the new tractor before winter sets in," Robert said, brushing sawdust from his flannel shirt. "Your mother wants us back for dinner in 20 minutes. From their position in the barn, they could see the farmhouse 100 yards away. Warm lights beginning to flicker on as dusk deepened, the comforting smells of Sarah Mason's cooking carried on the evening breeze. Jackson's younger sister, Emma, just 14, was setting the porch table for their traditional Saturday evening meal under the stars, one last celebration of autumn before Pennsylvania's bitter cold made outdoor dining impossible. "Jack, Dad, Mom says 15 minutes or she's feeding your portions to the chickens," Emma called, her blonde ponytail bouncing as she arranged mason jars filled with tea. Jackson waved acknowledgement. "Just need to stack these lumber scraps. Be right there." His father nodded, heading toward the house, while Jackson began organizing the remaining materials. Some of the old floorboards they'd replaced were still solid enough to repurpose, and waste wasn't in the Mason family vocabulary. As he lifted a particularly heavy section of weathered oak, something peculiar caught his eye, a glint of metal, where only dirt should be. Jackson paused, setting down the lumber and kneeling for a closer look. Decades of hay, dust, and debris had collected in this corner, undisturbed since his grandfather's time. The tornado's violent shaking had dislodged not just the barn's structure, but layers of compacted history. Jackson brushed away cobwebs and dirt, revealing what appeared to be a metal handle embedded in the ground. Curiosity piqued, he grabbed a nearby crowbar and carefully leveraged it against the mysterious object. With surprising ease, a trapdoor lifted, revealing a small underground space, and within it, a metal safe, roughly 2 feet square, its dark green surface corroded, but its dial and handle intact. "What the hell?" Jackson whispered, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent barn. The safe bore no family insignia, no Mason marking. Nothing in his grandfather's stories or his father's recollections had ever mentioned a hidden compartment or buried treasure. This was something else entirely, something deliberately concealed beneath the most overlooked corner of their property. Jackson checked his watch. Dinner would wait. This discovery demanded immediate investigation. He tried rotating the dial, but decades of disuse had seized its mechanism. The safe's handle similarly refused to budge under his increasingly forceful attempts. Whatever secrets it contained, they weren't surrendering easily. After several minutes of frustrated effort, Jackson sat back on his heels, contemplating his options. He could tell his father immediately, but something held him back. A strange, inexplicable feeling that this discovery was meant for him alone, at least initially. His grandfather had always shared a special bond with him, taking extra time to teach Jackson the farm's hidden stories and secrets. Perhaps this was one final mystery left for the right moment. "Jack, now or never for dinner?" His mother's voice carried from the farmhouse. "Coming," he called back, making a split-second decision. He lowered the trapdoor back into place, carefully arranging lumber and hay to conceal it once more. Tomorrow, he'd return with better tools and more time. Tonight, he'd keep this discovery to himself until he understood its significance. During dinner, Jackson found himself unusually quiet, his mind continuously drifting back to the hidden safe. His family noticed, particularly Emma, who had an uncanny ability to read her brother's moods. "Earth to Jack," she said, waving a hand before his face. "Dad asked if you finished the north corner." Jackson blinked, returning to the present. "Almost. Need another hour or so tomorrow." His father nodded, seemingly satisfied, but his mother's perceptive gaze lingered. Sarah Mason had an intuition about her children that bordered on supernatural, a quality that had made hiding teenage mischief nearly impossible throughout Jackson's youth. "Everything okay, honey?" she asked, passing him a second helping of apple cobbler. "You seem distracted." Jackson forced a smile. "Just tired and thinking about college applications." The mention of college successfully diverted the conversation, as it always did. His father launched into familiar commentary about practical degrees versus theoretical ones, while his mother advocated for following passion over practicality. The comfortable, well-worn family debate gave Jackson space to retreat into his thoughts, formulating a plan for the morning. He slept fitfully. That night, dreams filled with mysterious containers and hidden treasures. By dawn, Jackson was already dressed and heading toward the barn, telling his sleepy mother he wanted to finish repairs before church. The autumn morning was crisp, dew glistening on the fields as fog hung in the valleys. The farm had a particular beauty at this hour, peaceful, expansive, timeless. The barn stood silhouetted against the rising sun as Jackson approached, tools in hand. The massive structure had witnessed over a century of family history, but today it guarded something else, something that didn't feel connected to the Masons at all. Jackson worked methodically, removing the concealing materials and lifting the trapdoor once again. Morning light filtered through the barn's high windows, illuminating the metal safe with an almost reverential glow. He had brought a selection of tools, WD-40 for the seized mechanisms, a stethoscope borrowed from his mother's nursing supplies, and if all else failed, a hammer and chisel. The penetrating oil worked its magic on the dial after several applications, and Jackson began the tedious process of trying to crack the combination. He pressed the stethoscope against the safe surface, turning the dial slowly, listening for telling clicks, as his grandfather had once taught him during a summer fascination with lock-picking. 90 minutes of concentrated effort yielded nothing, but frustration. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, sitting back on an overturned bucket. The safe remained impassive, its secrets securely locked away. Jackson considered his remaining option, brute force. The chisel's edge gleamed in the strengthening sunlight as he positioned it near the safe's hinges. Before he could strike, however, something stopped him, an uncomfortable awareness that whatever this safe contained, it wasn't meant to be violated so crudely. If it had been hidden for decades, perhaps there was good reason. Instead, he carefully photographed the safe from multiple angles with his phone, capturing the manufacturer's nearly obscured name and serial number. Perhaps research would yield what force could not. When Jackson emerged from the barn 2 hours after entering, his family was already dressed for church, his father impatiently checking his watch beside their old pickup truck. "There you are," Robert called, We were about to leave without you." "Sorry," Jackson replied, hurriedly changing into church clothes in the downstairs bathroom. "Got caught up in the repairs." Throughout the service at Willowbrook Community Church, Jackson's phone burned in his pocket as he restlessly scrolled through search results for Drummond Security Covered Model Identification. The safe appeared to be a commercial model from the 1960s, primarily used by small businesses and government contractors. Nothing in this information connected to his family's farming history. After church came Sunday lunch at his grandmother's house in town, where Jackson's cousins, aunts, and uncles gathered weekly. Normally, he enjoyed these boisterous family gatherings, but today he found himself counting the minutes until he could continue his investigation. When his cousin Mike suggested an afternoon fishing expedition, Jackson begged off with claims of unfinished homework. "Since when do you choose calculus over catfish?" Mike asked suspiciously. "Senior year," Jackson replied with a shrug. "College. Applications don't complete themselves." By late afternoon, Jackson was back at the farm, this time with a specific objective. His online research had yielded a possible breakthrough. Drummond Security had used standardized factory combinations for many of their models, changing them only when customers requested personalization. If the safe had been abandoned or hastily hidden, perhaps the original combination remained. He knelt before the safe, illuminated now by a work light he'd positioned overhead. The paper in his hand listed 5 possible factory combinations for models manufactured between 1962 and 1968, the approximate age of the safe based on its design elements. The first 3 combinations yielded nothing. The fourth, right 82, left 26, right 71, produced a promising click, but the handle still wouldn't turn. The fifth, right 36, left 10, right 94, left 27, resulted in a distinctive mechanical release sound. Jackson's heart raced as he grasped the handle and applied gentle pressure. With surprising smoothness, the door swung open. The safe's interior smelled of old paper and metal. The unmistakable scent of long-sealed spaces finally exposed to fresh air. Jackson leaned forward eagerly, expecting perhaps old coins, family documents, or forgotten heirlooms. What he found instead sent a chill through his entire body. The safe contained 3 distinct items: a thick manila envelope with contingency stamped across its front in faded red letters, a small leather pouch that clinked with the sound of metal when Jackson carefully lifted it, and most disturbingly, a military-style handgun that Jackson immediately recognized as not belonging to any Mason. His grandfather had owned hunting rifles, properly registered and respectfully maintained, but never a sidearm like this. Jackson's hands trembled slightly as he placed the gun carefully aside, making mental note of its position. The leather pouch revealed its contents more willingly. 6 gold coins, their surfaces gleaming as if recently polished despite decades of confinement. Jackson recognized them from his history textbooks as gold double eagles, American $20 pieces that had stopped being minted in the 1930s. Each coin bore the date 1927. It was the manila envelope, however, that truly tested Jackson's composure. Inside were photographs, black and white surveillance-style images showing men in 1960s-era suits entering and exiting government buildings. Several photos featured the same distinguished-looking man, his face captured from various angles as he met with different individuals. Paperclipped to these images were handwritten notes in cramped, unfamiliar handwriting, detailing dates, times, and cryptic observations. Beneath the photographs lay several typewritten documents on government letterhead, their tops marked "classified," with additional security designations Jackson didn't recognize. The papers detailed something called Operation Blackbird, with references to Cuba, asset recruitment, and contingency plans. The dates spanned from 1962 to 1967. Jackson sat back, his mind racing. Nothing about these items connected to his family's farming heritage. The Mason legacy was one of agricultural perseverance, not government intrigue or classified operations. Whatever he had discovered, it wasn't a forgotten family treasure. It was something else entirely. Something potentially dangerous. As the implications began to crystallize, Jackson carefully returned the items to the safe, closed it, and concealed the trapdoor once more. He needed time to think, to decide his next steps carefully. His discovery felt increasingly like a burden rather than an adventure. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Jackson found himself scrutinizing their farmhouse with new eyes. The property had been in the Mason family since 1902, passing from father to son for generations. But the safe and its contents suggested that someone else had accessed their land, used their barn, without family knowledge. The thought was profoundly unsettling. "You're quiet again tonight," his mother observed as she passed the mashed potatoes. "Still worried about college applications?" Jackson managed a smile. "Just thinking about Grandpa, about his stories of the farm." His father's expression softened. "He'd be proud of the work you've done on the barn. He always said you had a feel for the place that reminded him of himself." "Did Grandpa ever mention anyone using our barn? Maybe before he took over the farm from his father?" Jackson asked, trying to sound casual. Robert Mason looked puzzled. "Using it how?" "I don't know. Maybe renting space or storing things. In the 1960s, maybe." His father shook his head slowly. "Not that I recall. Grandpa ran a pretty tight operation. Wasn't one for sharing farm resources outside the family. Why do you ask?" "Just curious," Jackson replied too quickly. "Found some old equipment that didn't look like our usual stuff." Later that night, after his family had gone to bed, Jackson sat at his computer, carefully researching historical gold coins and their current value. The 6 double eagles, if authentic, would be worth between $15,000 and $20,000 each at current market rates. A small fortune for a farming family, perpetually balancing on the edge of financial stability. But it was the classified documents that truly concerned him. The dates coincided with the height of the Cold War, Cuban Missile Crisis, and subsequent tensions. Whatever Operation Blackbird entailed, it had been serious enough to warrant high-level classification. As midnight approached, Jackson made a decision. Tomorrow after school, he would drive to the county library and use their computers to research. The names mentioned in the documents, his own search history, was too easily accessible to family members who shared their home network. The stakes felt too high for carelessness. He fell asleep eventually, the faces from those surveillance photographs haunting his dreams, merging with his grandfather's familiar features in unsettling ways. Outside, the autumn wind continued its patient whisper through the cornfields, stirring fallen leaves into dancing spirals around the old barn that had kept its secret for over 50 years, a secret now partially revealed to a 17-year-old boy who couldn't possibly understand the forces he'd unwittingly awakened. Monday morning arrived with heavy grey clouds and the threat of early snow, unusual for October in Pennsylvania. Jackson moved through his morning routine mechanically, his mind still filled with images from the safe. During the drive to Willowbrook High School, Emma chatted about upcoming Halloween festivities and science project deadlines, oblivious to her brother's distraction as he navigated the familiar country roads. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "Earth to Jack," Emma said, echoing her words from dinner the previous night. "Did you hear anything I just said?" "Something about your biology teacher and frogs," Jackson replied vaguely, slowing as they approached the school's entrance. Emma rolled her eyes. Not even close. I was talking about Melissa's Halloween party. You promised to drive me, remember? Sure, yeah. Next weekend, right? He pulled into the student parking lot, already scanning for an empty space. This Friday, Emma corrected, gathering her backpack as the truck rolled to a stop. What's going on with you lately? You're like totally zoned out, Jackson forced. A smile. Senior stress, nothing major. Emma clearly didn't believe him but let it slide as they parted ways at the main entrance. Throughout the day, Jackson moved through his classes in a fog, taking minimal notes and participating less than usual. In AP History, his teacher, Mr. Collins, noticed immediately. Jackson, perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts on the Warren Commission's findings? Mr. Collins asked, after Jackson had failed to respond to an earlier question. Sorry, what? Jackson straightened in his seat, aware of curious glances from classmates. The Kennedy assassination? The topic we've been discussing for the past 20 minutes? Mr. Collins' tone was more concerned than annoyed. Jackson had always been one of his most engaged students. Right. Sorry. Jackson fumbled through a vague answer about conflicting evidence and historical skepticism, enough to satisfy the immediate question, but below his usual standard. After class, Mr. Collins asked him to stay behind. Everything okay, Jackson? This isn't like you. The genuine concern in his teacher's voice almost broke through Jackson's careful facade. Mr. Collins had been a mentor throughout high school, a Vietnam veteran-turned-educator who combined academic rigor with real-world perspective. If anyone might understand the significance of classified Cold War documents, it would be him. I'm fine, just tired, Jackson replied automatically, then hesitated. Actually, Mr. Collins, I had a hypothetical question. The teacher leaned against his desk, giving Jackson his full attention. I'm listening. If someone found, hypothetically, old government documents marked classified from the 1960s, would they still be considered secret? Would there be legal issues with having them? Mr. Collins's expression shifted subtly, his academic interest clearly piqued. Depends on several factors: the specific classification level, the subject matter, whether they've been formally declassified. He studied Jackson carefully. This for a research project? Something like that. Jackson nodded, trying to appear casual. I was reading about how documents get declassified after certain time periods. Many do, but not all. Some materials from the Cold War era remain classified indefinitely, particularly if they involve intelligence sources, methods, or certain nuclear information. Mr. Collins reached for a book on his shelf. If you're interested in this topic, you might want to start here rather than with actual classified materials, which could indeed create legal complications. Jackson accepted the book, Intelligence. Operations, Cold War to Contemporary Conflicts, with a mumbled thanks, already planning his next move. The conversation, while informative, had only heightened his concerns about the safe's contents. After school, Jackson dropped Emma at her friend's house for a study session, then drove directly to Westbrook County Library. The grand brick building had been constructed in the 1930s with WPA funding and maintained its dignified presence despite limited county resources. Most importantly, its computers were on a separate network from his home, and the library's privacy policies were reassuringly strict. Jackson settled at a computer in the back corner, positioning himself to see anyone approaching. For the next 2 hours, he carefully researched names from the documents, particularly Richard Holloway, who appeared most frequently in the surveillance photos and accompanying notes. His search yielded sparse but significant results. Richard Holloway had been a mid-level State Department official during the Kennedy and Johnson administrations, specializing in Latin American affairs. Several archived newspaper articles mentioned his role in diplomatic missions to Central and South America between 1962 and 1967. In 1968, Holloway had apparently resigned from government service to work in the private sector. The most recent mention was a brief obituary from 1998, noting his passing at age 78, survived by a son and 2 grandchildren. Nothing in the public record suggested anything nefarious or connected to classified operations. Holloway seemed, on the surface, to have been a career diplomat who had served his country during a tumultuous period of international relations. Jackson wrote down the names of Holloway's survivors, particularly noting his son, Michael Holloway, who, according to a social media search, currently worked as a history professor at Georgetown University. The coincidence, or perhaps connection, between Holloway's diplomatic work and his son's academic focus on Cold War history seemed potentially significant. As Jackson prepared to leave the library, a final search caught his attention: a digitized newspaper article from the Chester County Herald dated July 1968. The small headline read, "State Department official recuperates at local farm." The brief article mentioned that Richard Holloway was recovering from exhaustion at an undisclosed farm property in the county, having stepped back from his diplomatic duties. The timing aligned perfectly with Holloway's resignation and the dates on the documents in the safe. Jackson printed the article, his mind racing with possibilities. Could Willowbrook Farm have been Holloway's retreat? The property had been owned by his great-grandfather at that time, though family law had never mentioned hosting a government official. What kind of exhaustion required hiding classified documents and gold coins in a barn floor safe? On the drive home, Jackson found himself checking his rearview mirror more frequently than usual, suddenly aware of how his research might appear to anyone monitoring library computers or search patterns. The rational part of his brain dismissed these concerns as paranoia fueled by too many spy movies, but another part, the part that had seen the gun nestled beside those classified files, wasn't so sure. When he arrived home, the farm seemed unusually quiet. His father's truck was missing, and no lights shone from the kitchen where his mother typically prepared dinner. Jackson checked his phone, finding a text from his mother explaining they'd gone to help his uncle with a broken tractor and would be home late. Perfect timing. Jackson headed directly to the barn, using the solitude as an opportunity to examine the safe's contents more thoroughly. This time, he brought a digital camera to document everything properly, along with gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. A precaution that felt melodramatic but necessary given the materials involved. The manila envelope revealed more details upon closer inspection. The typewritten documents outlined contingency extraction plans for assets in Cuba, following what they referred to as the October incident. Clearly, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Several pages detailed safe houses, contact protocols, and emergency signals. Holloway's name appeared throughout as the coordinating officer for these operations. Most intriguing was a handwritten note dated April 1968 that simply stated, "Evidence secured. H claims Directive 281 authorizes retention. Monitor and maintain. Distance until further notice." Jackson photographed each document carefully, making sure to capture all text and notation. The gun, which he now recognized as a Smith & Wesson Model 39, one of the first American-made double-action 9mm pistols, remained untouched. The gold coins, however, demanded closer examination. Each double eagle was in remarkable condition, as if they had been carefully preserved before being sealed away. Jackson knew from his research that these coins had been recalled and melted down after President Roosevelt's gold confiscation order in 1933. Those that survived were extremely valuable and technically still considered government property, unless they had specific documentation proving legal ownership. As Jackson carefully returned the items to the safe, his phone vibrated with an incoming call. His father's number flashed on the screen. "Hey, Dad. Jack, we're heading home now. Your mother wants to know if you've started dinner." "Not yet," Jackson replied, quickly securing the safe and replacing its covering. Just finished some homework in the barn. It's quiet out here. Good place to think, his father agreed. Listen, on our way back, we're stopping at the hardware store. Mr. Grayson mentioned someone had been asking about our property earlier today. Some guy in a suit, looking at county land records. Probably just another developer trying to buy up farmland, but thought you should know in case anyone comes by. Jackson's heart rate spiked. What kind of questions? Nothing specific, according to Ted. Just asking about the history of Willowbrook Farm, who owned it back in the 60s, that sort of thing. That's weird, Jackson managed, struggling to keep his voice casual. Not really. With all the development pushing out from Philadelphia, we get interest every few months. Anyway, we'll be home in about an hour. Maybe start those potatoes boiling. Sure thing, Jackson agreed, his mind already spinning with implications. After ending the call, Jackson worked quickly to ensure the safe was completely concealed, then returned to the house, his senses heightened to every sound and movement around the property. As he washed and quartered potatoes for dinner, he caught himself repeatedly glancing out the kitchen windows toward the long gravel driveway that connected Willowbrook Farm to the main road. That night, after his family had gone to bed, Jackson sat at his desk with Mr. Collins' book open beside his laptop. The chapter on Cold War intelligence operations described how the CIA and State Department had run numerous covert programs throughout Latin America, particularly focused on Cuba, after the Bay of Pigs failure and subsequent missile crisis. Many of these operations remained classified decades later due to the sensitive nature of asset recruitment and the potential diplomatic fallout if fully exposed. One paragraph in particular caught Jackson's attention. Following the October 1962 crisis, several unauthorized contingency operations were reportedly established by mid-level officials acting without full oversight. When these came to light during internal reviews in 1967-68, many were quietly shut down, their records sealed, or destroyed to avoid public scrutiny and potential congressional investigation. The timing aligned perfectly with Holloway's exhaustion and resignation. Jackson was beginning to form a theory. Richard Holloway had been running unauthorized operations, possibly became concerned about exposure during reviews, and established a contingency cache at a remote farm location, possibly with or without his great-grandfather's knowledge. The question remained, why would someone suddenly be investigating land records now, nearly 60 years later? Jackson closed the book and opened his email, drafting a message to Professor Michael Holloway at Georgetown. He carefully constructed his inquiry, presenting himself as a student working on a local history project about State Department officials. With connections to Chester County, he made no mention of the safe or its contents, simply asking if the professor would be willing to share any information about his father's time recuperating in the area during 1968. After sending the email, Jackson finally allowed himself to consider the worst-case scenarios. If the safe contained evidence of unauthorized intelligence operations, and if someone was actively searching for these materials after all these years, his discovery could potentially put his family at risk. The presence of the gun suggested Holloway had anticipated possible threats, which did nothing to ease Jackson's growing anxiety. Tuesday morning brought heavy rain that transformed the farm's dirt paths into muddy quagmires. Jackson navigated carefully as he made his way to the truck, where Emma waited impatiently. "You're going to make us late," she complained as he slid behind the wheel. "Roads will be slick." "Better late than hydroplaning into a ditch," he replied, starting the engine. As they pulled onto the main road, Jackson noticed a dark sedan parked about a quarter-mile from their driveway. The vehicle's windows were tinted, making it impossible to see the occupants, but something about its sleek, government-issue appearance triggered his internal alarms. "What are you looking at?" Emma asked, following his gaze. "Nothing," Jackson said too quickly. "Just checking for deer. They're active in this weather." Throughout the school day, Jackson found himself increasingly distracted, checking his phone for responses from Professor Holloway and worrying about the mysterious sedan. By afternoon, his anxiety had ratcheted up several notches when Mr. Collins approached him between classes. "Jackson, I've been thinking about your question about classified documents," the teacher said quietly. "Is there something specific you're working on? Something I should know about?" The concern in his teacher's voice was unmistakable. "Just research for a possible history major in college," Jackson replied, trying to sound convincing. Mr. Collins studied him carefully. "If you've come across something sensitive, there are proper channels for handling that kind of material. People who could help ensure everything is addressed appropriately." The warning was clear, though gently delivered. Jackson nodded non-committally and hurried to his next class, now certain he was navigating dangerous waters. After school, the dark sedan was gone from its morning position, but Jackson took a deliberately circuitous route home anyway, watching for any vehicles that might be following them. Emma, absorbed in a group text conversation, barely noticed their unusual path until Jackson turned onto Old Mill Road, a route they rarely used. "Where are we going?" she asked, looking up from her phone. "Scenic route," Jackson replied tersely. "Since when do you take scenic routes?" "You always say the fastest way home means more time for chores before dinner." Jackson forced a smile. "Just felt like a change." When they finally arrived at the farm, Jackson noted with relief that everything appeared normal. His mother's car was in its usual spot, and smoke rose steadily from the chimney, indicating she had started the wood stove against the damp chill. No strange vehicles, no sign of visitors. The momentary relief evaporated when they entered the kitchen. Their mother sat at the table with a stranger, a middle-aged woman in a charcoal pantsuit, who rose as they entered. "Jack, Emma, this is Miss Reynolds," their mother said, her voice carrying an unusual tension. "She's from the Historical Preservation Society and wants to ask some questions about Grandpa Mason and the farm during the 1960s. Ms. Reynolds extended her hand, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Jackson, I understand you've been doing some renovations in the old barn. I'd love to hear what you've discovered about its original structure." The woman's direct reference to the barn sent ice through Jackson's veins. No random historical preservationist would focus immediately on the exact location of the safe. Someone had been watching, or someone had talked. Perhaps Mr. Grayson at the hardware store, or even Mr. Collins after their conversation. "Nothing special," Jackson replied, shaking her hand briefly. "Just replacing some rotted beams and flooring." "Such historic buildings often contain surprises," Ms. Reynolds continued, her gaze steady on Jackson's face. "Hidden compartments, forgotten storage areas. Farmers from that era were quite resourceful. The probing was too specific to be coincidental." Jackson maintained eye contact, fighting to keep his expression neutral despite the alarm bells clanging in his head. "Mostly just dirt and mouse nests," he replied with a shrug. "I've got homework to finish before dinner. Nice meeting you." His room. Jackson immediately checked his email, finding a response from Professor Holloway. The message was brief but unsettling. "I don't typically discuss my father's government service with strangers. May I ask how you learned about his time in Chester County? This information is not widely known. Please call my office at your earliest convenience." Jackson stared at the professor's contact information, his pulse pounding in his ears. The reference to the information being not widely known confirmed his suspicions that Holloway's stay was connected to something sensitive. More concerning was the professor's clear surprise that someone knew about it at all. From downstairs, he heard his mother calling Miss Reynolds toward the front door, their conversation becoming fainter as they moved through the house. Jackson cracked his bedroom door, straining to hear their exchange. Appreciate your time, Mrs. Mason. If your son recalls anything unusual about the barn's structure, particularly in the north corner, we'd be very interested for our architectural archives." "I'll certainly let him know," his mother replied. "Though I'm surprised the Historical Society is interested in such specific details." "Historical preservation is often in the details," Ms. Reynolds responded smoothly. "We'll be in touch." As the front door closed, Jackson retreated into his room, mind racing. Ms. Reynolds, if that was even her real name, had directly referenced the north corner where the safe was hidden. There was no possible way she could know that location. Without surveillance or prior knowledge, Jackson grabbed his phone, suddenly certain of two things. First, whoever had hidden the safe's contents was connected to covert government operations. And second, someone was actively searching for those materials now. Someone willing to pose as a historical preservationist to gain access to his family's property. He needed to act quickly, before whoever was searching for Holloway's contingency cash took more direct measures to recover it. With trembling fingers, Jackson dialed Professor Holloway's number, hoping the son of a Cold War operative might provide answers before it was too late. The call connected after 3 rings, a voice answering with crisp academic formality. "Professor Holloway speaking." Jackson hesitated, suddenly aware of how suspicious his inquiry might seem. "Professor Holloway, this is Jackson Mason. I emailed you earlier about your father's time in Chester County." A pause stretched across the line. "Yes, Mr. Mason, I was quite surprised by your query. How exactly did you come across this information about my father?" Jackson weighed his options rapidly, deciding that partial honesty might yield more results. Then continued deception. "I found a newspaper article while researching local history. It mentioned your father recuperating at a farm in this area. Not a complete lie, though it carefully omitted his discovery of the safe." "I see." The professor's voice remained measured, revealing nothing. "And your interest stems from—" "The farm mentioned in the article might be my family's property. Willowbrook Farm. We've owned it since 1902. Another longer silence followed. When Professor Holloway spoke again, his tone had shifted subtly. "Willowbrook. Yes, that matches what I remember. I visited my father there once as a child. Beautiful property with an old red barn, if I recall correctly." The confirmation sent a jolt through Jackson. "That's our place. The barn's still red, though we just repaired it after a tornado." "Interesting timing," Holloway remarked. "Mason wasn't the owner's name back then." "My great-grandfather was Arthur Whitley. My grandmother was a Whitley before she married Grandpa." "Mason? Whitley, yes, kind man." The professor's voice warmed with recollection. "Look, Mr. Mason, I'm not comfortable discussing certain aspects of my father's government career over the phone, but given your family connection, perhaps we should speak in person. I'll be in Philadelphia for a conference this weekend. Could you meet me there?" Jackson's pulse quickened. "Yes, absolutely." "Good. The Liberty Hotel, Saturday at noon. And Mr. Mason?" Holloway's voice dropped lower. "If you found anything on the property related to my father, I strongly advise keeping it to yourself. There are complications that you may not fully appreciate." Before Jackson could respond, the professor ended the call, leaving him staring at his phone in stunned silence. The warning only confirmed what he already suspected. The safe's contents were significant enough to warrant caution even decades later. But Holloway's willingness to meet suggested the professor might provide answers, perhaps even guidance on what to do with his discovery. A knock at his bedroom door startled Jackson from his thoughts. "Jack?" His mother's voice carried concern. "Dinner's ready. Are you feeling okay?" "Fine, Mom. Just finishing some research." He closed the book on Cold War intelligence operations and tucked it under other schoolwork before opening the door. Sarah Mason studied her son's face carefully. That woman from the Historical Society asked a lot of questions about the barn renovations. She seemed particularly interested in anything you might have found. I thought it was odd. Jackson maintained a neutral expression despite his internal alarm. What did you tell her? That as far as I knew, you hadn't mentioned finding anything unusual. She tilted her head slightly, a familiar gesture that had preceded maternal interrogations throughout his childhood. Should I have told her something else? No, that's right. Just old wood and rusty nails. The lie tasted bitter, but Jackson rationalized it as protecting his mother from complications she didn't deserve. Throughout dinner, Jackson found himself hyper-aware of his parents' conversation, particularly when his father mentioned having seen another unfamiliar vehicle near the property line while returning from his uncle's farm. "Black SUV," Robert Mason remarked, passing the green beans to Emma. "Tinted windows. Driver was using binoculars, looking toward our place. When I slowed down, they drove off." "Probably just bird watchers," his mother suggested. "The migration season brings them out this time of year." Jackson focused on his plate, trying to appear unconcerned while his mind raced. First the sedan, then Ms. Reynolds, now an SUV with surveillance equipment. The intensity of interest in their property was escalating rapidly. After dinner, he helped with dishes, then claimed homework duties and retreated to his room. Instead of studying, Jackson carefully transferred the digital photos of the safe's contents to an encrypted folder on a USB drive, which he then hid inside a hollowed-out copy of The Old Man and the Sea, a hiding spot that now seemed childishly inadequate given the apparent sophistication of whoever was searching for Holloway's cache. Sleep came fitfully that night, disrupted by dreams of shadowy figures moving through the barn and his grandfather standing beside a younger Richard Holloway, both men looking at him with expressions of grave concern. Wednesday morning broke with unusual clarity after the previous day's rain, the autumn sun illuminating dew-drenched fields that sparkled like scattered diamonds across the farmland. Jackson woke before his alarm, a sense of urgency propelling him through his morning routine. Something told him time was running short. "You're up early," his father commented when Jackson appeared in the kitchen, already dressed and reaching for the coffee pot. "Thought I'd check the barn repairs before school, make sure yesterday's rain didn't cause any problems." Robert Mason nodded approvingly. "Good thinking. I need to head to town for feed supplies. Want me to look over your work when I get back?" "No need," Jackson replied, perhaps too quickly. "Just routine inspection." The barn stood silhouetted against the brightening eastern sky as Jackson approached, keyring jingling in his pocket. Despite its familiarity, or perhaps because of it, the structure suddenly seemed ominous, guardian to secrets that were drawing increasingly dangerous attention to his family's land. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed. The morning light filtered through high windows, creating dusty beams that illuminated the newly repaired support structures and fresh flooring. Jackson moved directly to the north corner, confirming that his concealment of the trapdoor remained intact. After a moment's consideration, he decided against opening the safe again. The less he disturbed it, the better, given the apparent surveillance of the property. Instead, he gathered his courage and did something he'd been avoiding. He called his grandfather's oldest friend, Walter Kemp, who lived in town and had worked the neighboring farm until his retirement a decade earlier. If anyone knew about connections between his great-grandfather and a government official named Holloway, it would be Walter. The old man answered on the fourth ring, his gravelly voice immediately brightening when Jackson identified himself. "Jack, Mason, good to hear from you, son. How's that barn project coming along?" "Finished the major repairs," Jackson replied, settling onto a hay bale. "Walter, I need to ask you something about Great-Grandpa Whitley. Did he ever mention hosting a government official at the farm? Back in the 60s, someone named Richard Holloway?" The silence that followed stretched long enough that Jackson checked his phone to ensure the call hadn't dropped. "Walter, you still there?" "I'm here." The old man's voice had lost its warmth, replaced by a caution Jackson had never heard before. "Where'd you hear that name, Jack?" "Found an old newspaper article. It mentioned a State Department official recuperating at a local farm around 1968. I'm doing a history project and thought, stop digging, Jackson." Walter's interruption came sharp and clear. "Arthur never discussed that summer, not even with your grandfather. There are things better left in the past." Jackson's pulse quickened. "So Holloway was here, at Willowbrook?" Another lengthy pause. "Jack, listen to me carefully. Arthur Whitley was a patriot who served his country in ways few people ever knew about, during the war and after. Sometimes that service continued in quiet ways. That's all I'm saying on the matter, except this. If you've found something related to that time, turn it over to the proper authorities immediately." "What authorities? Who should I contact?" "I can't advise you there, but for your family's sake, don't keep whatever you've found." The line went dead before Jackson could respond. Walter's reaction only deepened the mystery. His great-grandfather, a farmer he'd always imagined as simply working the land, apparently had connections to government operations, mysterious enough to warrant continued secrecy decades later. The revelation shifted Jackson's understanding of his family history, suggesting layers of complexity he'd never imagined beneath the straightforward agricultural narrative he'd been raised with. Checking his watch, Jackson realized he needed to leave for school. As he secured the barn and walked toward the house, he noticed a drone hovering at the edge of their property, its small form nearly invisible against the morning sky. When he raised his hand to shield his eyes for a better look, the device immediately ascended and moved away, confirming his worst suspicions about surveillance. Throughout the school day, Jackson moved through classes mechanically, his thoughts consumed by Walter's warning and the approaching meeting with Professor Holloway. During lunch, he researched the Liberty Hotel in Philadelphia, planning his Saturday trip and considering whether to tell his parents about the meeting. Given the escalating situation, keeping them informed seemed prudent, though he would need a plausible explanation that didn't involve classified documents and Cold War secrets. The decision was made for him when he arrived home that afternoon. His father's truck was in the driveway, alongside two unfamiliar black government vehicles. Jackson's stomach dropped as he parked beside them, noting the government plates and the unmistakable bearing of the two men in suits standing on the front porch with his father. "There he is now," Robert Mason said as Jackson approached, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "Jack, these gentlemen are from the FBI. They'd like to ask you some questions." The taller agent extended his hand. "Special Agent Donovan, and this is Special Agent Ramirez. Your father's been kind enough to allow us to speak with you regarding a matter of national security." Jackson shook the offered hand automatically, his mouth suddenly dry. "National security. Perhaps we could speak inside?" Agent Ramirez suggested, his tone making it clear this wasn't actually a request. In the kitchen, Sarah Mason hovered anxiously, offering coffee that the agents declined. Emma had been sent to a friend's house, a detail that underscored the seriousness of the situation. Whatever these men wanted, they'd ensured the conversation would remain between Jackson and his parents. Agent Donovan placed a file folder on the kitchen table but didn't open it. "Jackson, we understand you've been conducting research into Richard Holloway, a former State Department official who stayed at this farm in 1968. The directness of the statement confirmed what Jackson had already suspected. His online searches and phone conversations had been monitored. "It's for a history project," he replied, falling back on his cover story. "I found an old newspaper article that mentioned him staying at a local farm." Agent Ramirez studied him intently. And your interest in this particular historical figure stems from the connection to our property. I thought it was interesting that a government official stayed here. Jackson maintained eye contact, trying to project innocent historical curiosity rather than guilty knowledge. Jackson, his father interjected. The agents explained that Mr. Holloway's work involved sensitive matters. If you found something during the barn renovations, now would be the time to mention it. The gentle prompt from his father made Jackson's decision inevitable. These men already knew, or strongly suspected, about the safe. Continued denial would only escalate the situation and potentially implicate his parents. I found a safe, he admitted finally, hidden under the floorboards in the barn's north corner. It's old, probably from the 60s based on the model. Agent Donovan nodded, unsurprised. And did you open this safe, Jackson? Yes. No point lying about that either. It contained some documents, old coins, and a handgun. Did you remove any items from the safe? Agent Ramirez asked, his tone sharpening. No, everything's still there. I just took photos. As soon as the words left his mouth, Jackson regretted them. We'll need those photos, Donovan said immediately. All copies, including any cloud storage or email attachments. Jackson's parents exchanged alarmed glances. What exactly is going on here? Robert Mason demanded, his initial cooperation giving way to parental concern. My son found an old safe on our property. That's hardly a matter of national security. Agent Donovan opened the folder, removing a document which he slid across the table. This is a matter of classified information that remains sensitive despite its age. We're authorized to recover all materials related to Operation Blackbird and any documentation of the Holloway contingency protocols. The specific reference to Operation Blackbird, a term Jackson had seen only in the safe's documents, confirmed these agents knew exactly what the safe contained. This wasn't a fishing expedition. They were there for Holloway's cash specifically. I don't understand, Sarah Mason said, her voice tight with concern. Why would classified government material be hidden on our farm? We're just farmers. Your grandfather, Mrs. Mason, had certain connections to intelligence operations during and after his military service, Agent Ramirez explained with surprising gentleness. He occasionally provided secure locations for sensitive materials or personnel. This arrangement was informal but vital to national security during a critical period in Cold War operations. The revelation stunned both Jackson and his parents. Arthur Whitley, a man known in family stories for his prize-winning corn and meticulous barn building, had apparently served as some kind of intelligence asset, offering his remote farm as a secure location for classified operations. I'll show you where the safe is, Jackson offered, seeing no alternative. But I'd like to understand what's happening. These materials have been hidden for over 50 years. Why the urgency now? The agents exchanged glances before Donovan responded. Recent developments in Cuban-American relations have renewed interest in certain historical operations. Materials that remained dormant for decades now have potential diplomatic significance. It wasn't a complete answer, but it was more than Jackson had expected. He led the agents to the barn, his parents following close behind, their expressions reflecting the same mixture of confusion and concern that Jackson felt. In the barn, Jackson removed the concealing materials and revealed the trapdoor. Agent Ramirez photographed each step of the process, while Donovan maintained a respectful but watchful position. When the safe came into view, both agents visibly tensed. Please step. Back, Donovan instructed, removing latex gloves from his pocket. This is now an official evidence recovery operation. For the next hour, Jackson and his parents watched as the agents methodically documented the safe and its contents. Each document was photographed in place before being carefully removed and placed in evidence bags. The gold coins received similar treatment. though Donovan noted they might eventually be returned as they were not directly relevant to the sensitive materials. The gun, which Jackson now learned was a diplomatic-issue sidearm, was handled with particular care, its serial number photographed and called in for verification. Throughout the process, additional agents arrived, establishing a perimeter around the barn and bringing specialized equipment to analyze the surrounding area for other potential hiding spots. By late afternoon, the family's farm had been transformed into something resembling a crime scene, though both Donovan and Ramirez repeatedly assured them they weren't under investigation. "Your family performed a service for this country," Ramirez explained as they finalized the evidence collection. "Your great-grandfather agreed to provide a secure location for contingency materials during a period of significant international tension. The fact that these materials remained undisturbed for over 50 years speaks to how well he fulfilled that responsibility." As the agents prepared to depart with their carefully packaged evidence, Donovan approached Jackson directly. "We'll need your phone and any other devices with the photos you mentioned." Jackson hesitated. "My phone has schoolwork and personal information. We'll return it within 48 hours after removing only the relevant materials," Donovan assured him. "Standard procedure." Reluctantly, Jackson surrendered his phone and mentioned the USB drive hidden in his room. He didn't volunteer information about his upcoming meeting with Professor Holloway, a detail that suddenly seemed both more important and more dangerous given the day's events. As the FBI vehicles finally departed their property, the Mason family stood together on the porch, watching the caravan of black SUVs disappear down their long driveway. The autumn sun was setting, casting long shadows across fields that had been in their family for generations, fields that apparently held more history than any of them had realized. "I'm sorry," Jackson said finally, breaking the stunned silence. "I should have told you as soon as Thursday morning arrived with a chilling fog that crept across Willowbrook Farm, shrouding the fields and buildings in ghostly white." Jackson stood at his bedroom window, watching the mist swirl around the barn that had become the center of an unexpected storm in their lives. Without his phone, he felt oddly disconnected, cut off from both information and communication. "Jack, breakfast!" His mother's voice carried up the stairs, a reassuring remnant of normalcy amid the surreal events of the past few days. The kitchen smelled of bacon and coffee, but the usual morning chatter was subdued. Emma glanced up from her cereal, clearly sensing the tension, despite having been shielded from most of the details. "Can I have my phone back?" Jackson asked his father, who sat reading yesterday's newspaper with unusual intensity. Robert Mason looked up, his expression conflicted. "Agent Donovan called early this morning. Said they're processing everything as quickly as possible, but it might be another day." "Did they say anything else about what they found?" "Only that they appreciate our cooperation and will be in touch if they have further questions." His father folded the newspaper, leaning forward with elbows on the table. "Jack, I know there's more to this than what they've told us. Your mother and I discussed it late into the night. Arthur Whitley, her grandfather, was apparently involved in something far beyond farming." Sarah Mason placed a plate of eggs in front of Jackson, her hand lingering briefly on his shoulder. "I called my Aunt Caroline last night. She's the only one of Grandpa Arthur's children still living. She was just a teenager in the 60s, but she remembers that summer when a government man stayed with them." Jackson paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. "What did she say about him?" "Not much specific. Said he was polite, quiet, spent most days writing in a small office they set up for him in the house. But she did mention something interesting. During his stay, her father installed a new lock on the barn and strictly forbade the children from entering without him present." "Which was unusual," Robert added, "because according to your mother, Arthur was normally happy to have the kids help with farm chores, including those in the barn." This new information aligned with everything Jackson had pieced together. His great-grandfather hadn't just allowed Holloway to hide sensitive materials. He had actively participated in securing them, creating a restricted area in his own barn to house classified documents. Do you think Grandpa Arthur knew what was in those papers? What Holloway was involved in? Jackson asked, pushing his eggs around absently. His mother sighed. Aunt Caroline says her father never discussed it, even years later, just said he was doing his duty when she asked about that summer. The conversation paused as Emma finished her breakfast and gathered her backpack. We're going to be late, she announced, seemingly grateful for the routine obligation of school. Jackson nodded, suddenly eager himself for the distraction of classrooms and assignments, anything to take his mind off safe secrets and government agents. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Without his phone, Jackson felt untethered, constantly reaching for a device that wasn't there. In history class, Mr. Collins gave him a significant look but said nothing about their previous conversation regarding classified documents. The teacher's silence felt ominous, suggesting he might have been contacted by the FBI as well. During the lunch period, Jackson wandered to the library, where he could use a school computer to check his email. As expected, his inbox contained a follow-up message from Professor Holloway. Mr. Mason, I haven't received a response confirming our Saturday meeting. Please advise if you plan to attend. This matter deserves proper closure. Jackson stared at the screen, weighing his options. The FBI now had the physical evidence from the safe, but they didn't know about his planned meeting with Holloway. The professor might still provide valuable context about his father's activities, information the FBI might not share with the 17-year-old farm kid who had stumbled onto classified history. Using the school's printer, Jackson produced a simple map of downtown Philadelphia with the Liberty Hotel circled. Without his phone's GPS, he'd need to navigate the city the old-fashioned way. Then he composed a brief reply to Professor Holloway. Meeting confirmed. Will explain situation in person. After school, Jackson found his father waiting in the truck. Instead of walking home as he usually did. Thought I'd pick you up today, Robert explained as Jackson climbed in. Your mother and I have been talking. We think you should step back from this whole situation. Focus on school, college applications, normal teen stuff. Jackson buckled his seatbelt, noting the unusual tension in his father's shoulders. Did something else happen? Robert hesitated, then nodded. Walter Kemp called, said men in suits visited him this morning, asking about his knowledge of Arthur Whitley's activities during the 1960s. Then your mother's boss mentioned 2 agents dropping by the hospital, where she works, apparently verifying her employment records and background. They're investigating our family. Jackson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn weather. Seems that way. Walter thinks we should lay low, avoid further involvement. His father navigated the familiar country roads with unusual caution, checking the rearview mirror, more frequently than normal. Whatever was in that safe, Jack, it stirred up something significant. Jackson weighed his words carefully. Dad, I'm supposed to meet someone on Saturday who might know more about all this. Professor Michael Holloway, Richard Holloway's son. He teaches history at Georgetown, specializes in Cold War operations. Robert's hands tightened on the steering wheel. And when were you planning to mention this? I arranged it before the FBI showed up. He confirmed that his father stayed at our farm and seemed willing to explain why, but only in person. His father fell silent, processing this information, as they turned onto the long gravel drive leading to their farm. A quarter-mile down the road, he pulled over, stopping the truck beneath a large oak tree. Jack, I need you to understand something. Your mother and our priority is keeping this family safe. If these materials are significant enough for the FBI to investigate our backgrounds, they're significant enough to be careful about. Meeting with this professor could complicate things further, or it could help us understand what's happening, Jackson countered. Don't you want to know why great-grandpa Arthur was involved with intelligence operations? why our farm was used. To hide classified documents? Robert sighed heavily. Of course I do, but not at the expense of dragging this family deeper into whatever this is. The FBI has the documents now. Maybe we should let them handle it and move on. Dad, I gave them everything from the safe. But don't you think we deserve to know why our family history suddenly involves Cold War secrets and government agents crawling all over our property? His father studied him for a long moment. You're just like your grandfather, stubborn as a mule once you set your mind on something. He put the truck back in gear, continuing down the driveway. If, and I mean if, your mother and I agree, to this meeting, one of us goes with you. Non-negotiable. Jackson nodded, relief washing over him. That seems fair. When they reached the house, they found Sarah Mason standing on the porch, her expression troubled as she spoke with a man Jackson didn't recognize. The stranger wore a navy blazer with khaki pants, not quite the government-issue suit of yesterday's agents, but carrying a similar air of authority. Jack, your mother's waiting with Dr. Levine from the university, Robert said quietly as they parked. He says he's here about your scholarship application, but the timing seems convenient. They approached cautiously, Jackson noting the visitor's leather briefcase and the official-looking credential card clipped to his breast pocket. Ah, you must be Jackson, the man said, extending his hand with practiced warmth. I'm Dr. Andrew Levine, Associate Director of Admissions at Bryn Mawr. I was just explaining to your mother that we're conducting personal visits with our top scholarship candidates this year. Jackson shook the offered hand, immediately suspicious. I didn't apply to Bryn Mawr. It's a women's college. Dr. Levine's smile faltered momentarily. Haverford, I meant. The coordinated program between Haverford and Bryn Mawr. We're sister institutions. He recovered smoothly, but the slip confirmed Jackson's suspicion. This was no ordinary college representative. Perhaps we could discuss your academic interests inside, Dr. Levine suggested, gesturing toward the front door. Robert stepped forward. Actually, this isn't a good time. Jackson has chores, and we're preparing for guests. Perhaps you could leave your card and we'll schedule a proper appointment. Dr. Levine's polite facade hardened slightly. Mr. Mason, I assure you this conversation would be valuable for your son's academic future, and I assure you, Robert replied firmly, that we'll contact your office to arrange a suitable time. Now, if you'll excuse us. The standoff lasted several uncomfortable seconds before Dr. Levine retrieved a business card from his pocket. As you wish. Jackson, I look forward to discussing your interest in history, particularly mid-20th century diplomatic operations. He emphasized the last words meaningfully before turning to leave. They watched in silence as the man drove away, his sedan crunching gravel beneath its tires. Only when he had disappeared down the driveway did Sarah speak. He wasn't from any college. The card says Bryn Mawr, but when I called the admissions office while you two were coming up the drive, they had no record of a Dr. Levine or any scheduled home visits. Robert nodded grimly. Someone else is interested in what Jack found. Someone. Separate from the FBI team yesterday. Or someone monitoring the official investigation, Jackson suggested, the realization chilling him. Yesterday's agents took the physical evidence, but maybe someone else wants to know how much we understand about what we found. His parents exchanged concerned glances. Inside, his father decided. We need to talk about this properly. Away from prying eyes. In the kitchen, they spoke in hushed tones, despite being inside their own home. The visit from the fake college representative had heightened their sense of surveillance and intrusion. This is getting out of hand, Sarah said, nervously checking the windows. First FBI agents, now someone posing as a college administrator? All over a safe that's been hidden in our barn for 50 years. Whatever was in those documents must be significant, Robert replied. Jack, you saw them. What exactly did they contain? Jackson described the contents in detail. The classified operation papers referencing Cuba, the surveillance photos, the cryptic note about evidence secured. His parents listened with growing concern. "And you still want to meet with this professor? On Saturday?" his mother asked when he'd finished. "More than ever," Jackson confirmed. "He might be the only person willing to explain what this is really about. The FBI took the evidence, but told us almost nothing. That fake college rep was clearly trying to figure out what we know. Professor Holloway might be our only chance at understanding why our family is suddenly in the middle of all this." His parents conferred silently through looks and subtle gestures, the wordless communication of a long marriage. Finally, his father nodded. "I'll drive you to Philadelphia. We'll meet this professor together, hear what he has to say, then decide our next steps as a family." "Thank you," Jackson said, relieved. "I think this is the right decision." "I hope so," his mother replied softly. "Because I get the feeling we're stepping deeper into something much bigger than a historical curiosity." That evening, the family maintained a pretense of normalcy, playing board games after dinner while carefully avoiding discussion of safes, classified documents, or mysterious visitors. Only when Emma had gone to bed did the adults resume their conversation in the living room, voices kept low despite the television running as background noise. "I've been thinking about what Arthur might have been involved in," Sarah said, curled in the corner of the sofa with a cup of tea. "My father, his son, always described him as strictly a farmer, but there were hints of something more." The rain continued through the night, a steady drumbeat against the farmhouse roof that mingled with the occasional crackle of radio communications as FBI agents maintained their positions around the property. Jackson lay awake in his bedroom, listening to the muted sounds of a security operation he still couldn't quite believe centered on his family's farm. Through his window, he could occasionally glimpse flashlight beams sweeping across the yard as agents rotated positions. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by vivid dreams, where his great-grandfather Arthur Whitley stood in the barn, silently, pointing to the hiding place of other secrets Jackson had yet to discover. Each time he woke, the same questions circled through his mind. Had Arthur Whitley knowingly helped conceal evidence of espionage? Was he a willing participant in Holloway's activities, or merely a patriot who believed he was serving his country? By dawn, the rain had slackened to a fine mist that hung over the fields like a gauzy curtain. Jackson rose early, drawn by voices downstairs. In the kitchen, he found his father and Agent Wilson engaged in tense conversation over coffee. "Necessary precaution given the circumstances," Wilson was saying as Jackson entered. She nodded a professional greeting toward him. "Good morning, Jackson." "What's a necessary precaution?" he asked, helping himself to coffee from the pot. Robert Mason's expression was a mixture of resignation and frustration. Agent Wilson was explaining that the security team will be conducting a more thorough search of the property today. Apparently, there might be additional materials hidden beyond what we found in the safe. Jackson's pulse quickened. "Based on what evidence?" Wilson regarded him carefully. "Analysis of the documents recovered from the safe suggests they represent only a portion of what Richard Holloway reportedly secured. There are references to supplementary documentation and physical evidence that remain unaccounted for." "And you think they're still somewhere on our farm, after 50 years? "It's a possibility we need to eliminate," Wilson replied evenly. "Your family has owned this property continuously since Arthur Whitley's time, with minimal structural changes to outbuildings. If additional materials were concealed, they could well remain intact." Sarah Mason appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a bathrobe, her expression troubled. "They want to use ground-penetrating radar around the barn foundation and other outbuildings," she told Jackson. "Agent Donovan is bringing in specialized equipment later this morning." "Don't we have any say in this?" Jackson directed the question to Wilson rather than his parents. The agent's expression softened slightly. Your parents have been extremely cooperative, which we appreciate. Given the sensitivity of the materials already recovered and the apparent interest from unauthorized parties, these additional measures are strongly recommended. However, yes, technically you could require us to obtain a formal search warrant, which would only delay the inevitable and potentially make things more difficult, Robert added wearily. We've agreed to the search, Jack. The sooner they complete their investigation, the sooner our lives can return to normal. Normal seemed an increasingly distant concept to Jackson, but he nodded, understanding. What about Emma? She's going to have questions about why FBI agents are scanning our property with radar equipment. We've suggested a visit to your grandmother's for the weekend, Sarah explained. Your Uncle James is coming to pick her up after breakfast. The arrival of Emma herself ended further discussion as the family attempted to maintain a veneer of normalcy during the morning meal. Agent Wilson tactfully retreated to the front porch, giving them privacy while remaining within earshot. "Why can't Jack come to Grandma's too?" Emma asked as she finished her cereal, clearly sensing the underlying tension despite their efforts. "To shield her. Your brother has a college interview in Philadelphia tomorrow," Sarah improvised smoothly. "Dad's driving him up later today." Jackson exchanged a quick glance with his father. Apparently, their planned meeting with Professor Holloway hadn't been completely abandoned, despite Agent Donovan's objections. The fabricated college interview provided a plausible cover story for both Emma and potentially the FBI agents monitoring them. After breakfast, Jackson helped Emma pack an overnight bag, maintaining the pretense of routine while his mind raced. With implications, his parents were clearly planning something beyond simple compliance with the FBI's investigation. "Is something bad happening?" Emma asked suddenly as he helped her find her favorite sweater. "Mom and Dad are acting weird, and there are people watching our house." Jackson hesitated, weighing how much to share with his 14-year-old sister. "It's complicated, Em. Remember the barn renovations after the tornado? I found something that belonged to Great-Grandpa Whitley, and now some government historians are interested in it." "You're lying," she stated flatly, her perceptiveness catching him off guard. "But that's okay. I know grown-ups lie when they think kids can't handle the truth." "You're not a kid," Jackson acknowledged, "but this isn't my secret to share completely. I promise we'll explain everything when it's resolved." Emma studied him with surprising maturity. "Just be careful, okay? Whatever's happening feels serious." "It is," he admitted, "but we're handling it." Their uncle's arrival created a welcome distraction. James Cooper, their mother's younger brother, brought his characteristic energy and good humor into the tense atmosphere, though Jackson noticed his smile tightened when he spotted Agent Wilson on the porch. "Quite the weather we're having," he commented as he helped load Emma's bag into his car, his eyes darting to the FBI agents visible at the property perimeter. "Your mum mentioned some government researchers were interested in the old barn. Something historical?" "Something like that," Jackson replied, recognizing his uncle's careful phrasing as an indication he'd been given the sanitized version of events. After Emma's departure, the farm fell into an uneasy quiet, punctuated by the arrival of additional FBI vehicles carrying equipment and personnel. Agent Donovan returned, accompanied by technicians with specialized scanning equipment. The operation had expanded significantly since the previous day, taking on the characteristics of a major evidence recovery effort. Jackson watched from the front porch as agents established a systematic grid pattern around the barn, preparing for ground-penetrating radar surveys. Others photographed every inch of the outbuildings, documenting structural features with meticulous attention to detail. "Impressive resources for a 50-year-old case," he commented as Agent Wilson joined him. "Cold cases sometimes become hot again when new evidence emerges," she replied, her professional demeanor softening slightly. especially when they involve matters of counterintelligence that could have current implications. You mean like Cuban relations? Agent Donovan mentioned something about recent diplomatic developments. Wilson's expression revealed nothing. Policy changes often prompt reassessment of historical operations, particularly those with potential continuing relevance. That's a very elaborate non-answer, Jackson observed. The agent's lips quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. The full context goes beyond what I'm authorized to discuss. I can tell you that the materials recovered from your safe have significant value beyond mere historical interest, because they might prove whether Richard Holloway was a spy or a counterintelligence officer building a case against someone else. Wilson studied him with newfound respect. You've been connecting the dots effectively, Jackson. Yes, that ambiguity is part of the picture. Holloway's true role has remained an open question in intelligence circles for decades. Their conversation was interrupted by Robert Mason emerging from the house, car keys in hand. "Jack, we need to run some errands in town before the roads get bad again. The forecast is calling for more heavy rain this afternoon." Agent Wilson straightened. "I'll need to accompany you or arrange for another agent to do so. We're maintaining protective coverage of family members." "That won't be necessary," Robert replied firmly. "We're just going to the feed store and grocery shopping. Standard Saturday errands." "I understand, sir, but given the circumstances," he interrupted. "My son and I could use some normal father-son time away from the circus our farm has become, unless we're under some kind of house arrest." Wilson's expression tightened at the challenge. "Of course not, Mr. Mason. This is a protective arrangement, not a detention. However, protocol strongly recommends we'll have our phones with us," Robert cut in again, "and we'll stay in public places. 2 hours, that's all we're asking." The standoff lasted several uncomfortable seconds before Wilson relented. 2 hours. Please keep your phones on and location services enabled. Call immediately if you notice anything unusual." As they climbed into the truck, Jackson sensed his father's simmering tension. Once they were down the driveway and out of immediate earshot, Robert spoke in a low, controlled voice. "Your mother and I talked it over last night after you went to bed. We're still meeting Professor Holloway tomorrow. The FBI is keeping something significant from us, and I don't appreciate being treated like potential security risks on our own. In property, what about Agent Donovan's warning about Holloway potentially having concerning connections?" Robert navigated the familiar country roads with unusual alertness, checking mirrors frequently. "Maybe he does, but he's also the only person who's offered to actually explain what's happening. The FBI is collecting evidence and expanding their search while telling us almost nothing. So what's the plan?" "Wilson will notice if we head toward Philadelphia instead of the feed store." His father smiled grimly. "We're actually going to the feed store and grocery shopping, maintaining our cover story. But I've arranged something else first." 20 minutes later, they pulled into the gravel parking lot of St. Mark's Lutheran Church, where Walter Kemp's pickup truck was already waiting. The old man sat inside, engine running, his weathered face brightening when he spotted them. "Smart to meet here," he commented as they approached his vehicle. "Church parking lot on Saturday morning means Bible study groups coming and going. Nothing suspicious about a conversation between vehicles." "Thanks for doing this, Walter," Robert said, leaning against the truck window. "Did you bring what I asked about?" The old man nodded, passing a small package wrapped in brown paper through. "The window? Arthur's personal papers like you requested. Not much. Your grandmother cleaned out most of his things after he passed. But these were in a lockbox I've kept since she didn't know what to do with them." Jackson accepted the package, surprised by its light weight. "What is it exactly?" "Letters, mostly, some photographs. A journal from the war years." Walter's expression grew solemn. "After you called asking about Holloway, I remembered Arthur had mentioned him once, in connection with something called the Cuba matter. never elaborated, but it seemed important enough that I thought these might help. Did the FBI agents ask you about these papers when they visited? Robert inquired. Walter shook his head. They were fishing for general information, what I knew about Arthur's activities in the 60s, whether he ever mentioned government work. I played dumb. Those vultures have no business picking through a good man's life 50 years after the fact. Jackson carefully tucked the package inside his jacket. Do you think my great-grandfather was involved in something questionable? The old man's face hardened. Arthur Whitley was the most honorable man I ever knew. Whatever he did, he believed it was right for his country. Don't let anyone tell you different. After saying their goodbyes to Walter, they continued to the feed store and grocery as planned, maintaining their cover story while the package of Arthur's personal papers burned like a brand against Jackson's chest. Neither spoke about it until they were back in the truck, heading toward the farm with their legitimate purchases. We'll look through those papers tonight, Robert said quietly. After your mother gets home from her hospital shift. Tomorrow, we'll take what we've learned to the meeting with Professor Holloway. What if the FBI searches my room and finds them? They won't. His father's expression was resolute. I've had enough of government agents treating our family like suspects. We've cooperated fully, turned over the safe contents, allowed them access to our property. Now we're going to get some answers on our terms. When they returned to the farm, they found the FBI operation had intensified. A large tent had been erected beside the barn, housing what appeared to be a mobile command center. Agents in protective coveralls were carefully excavating an area. Near the structure's foundation, Agent Donovan approached as they parked, his expression grave. Mr. Mason, we've discovered something you should be aware of. Robert tensed visibly. What now? The radar survey identified an anomaly beneath the barn's north corner, an extension of the hidden compartment where the safe was found. Our team has uncovered what appears to be a secondary cache. Jackson exchanged alarmed glances with his father. Whatever Arthur Whitley had been involved in, it clearly extended beyond the single safe they'd discovered. What did you find? Jackson asked, unable to contain his curiosity. Another container, a waterproof military-style footlocker. We're extracting it carefully due to age and potential degradation. Donovan gestured toward the excavation site. Given that this property has been in your family's continuous possession, I wanted to inform you directly and invite you to observe the opening once we've secured it. The gesture seemed designed to rebuild goodwill after the increasingly intrusive investigation. Robert nodded stiffly, accepting the olive branch. When do you expect to open it? Within the hour, once we've documented its position and condition thoroughly. The next 60 minutes passed with excruciating slowness as Jackson and his father watched the FBI evidence team work. Jackson kept Arthur's papers concealed inside his jacket, acutely aware of their presence while surrounded by federal agents. Eventually, the footlocker was carefully extracted from its hiding place and transferred to the command tent. Inside, under bright portable lights, Agent Donovan supervised as technicians photographed the container from every angle before attempting to open it. The locker was remarkably well preserved, its rubber seals having protected the contents from moisture for decades. Ready to proceed with opening, the lead technician announced, looking to Donovan for final approval. The agent nodded, then glanced at Jackson and Robert. Just to be clear, anything we find remains government property given the classified nature of the materials already recovered, but you're welcome to observe as property owners. The footlocker's latches released with surprising ease, suggesting they had been well oiled before being sealed away. As the lid was raised, Jackson leaned forward, curiosity overcoming caution. Unlike the safe with its limited contents, the footlocker was filled to capacity with neatly organized materials. Multiple manila folders labeled with cryptic codes, film canisters, what appeared to be magnetic recording tapes, and most surprisingly, a vintage Minox camera, the stereotypical spy camera of Cold War films. Surveillance equipment, Donovan murmured almost to himself, consistent with a counterintelligence operation. The technicians methodically removed and catalogued each item, creating a visual record before transferring anything to evidence bags. One folder labeled simply Havana 1967 contained dozens of photographs showing various individuals meeting in what appeared to be cafes, parks, and hotel lobbies. Many featured the same distinguished man Jackson recognized from the safe. Documents as Richard Holloway. Were these taken by my great-grandfather? Jackson asked, studying the images. Donovan shook his head. Unlikely. The angle and quality suggest professional surveillance photography. Your great-grandfather's role appears to have been securing these materials rather than generating them. Another folder contained what looked like transcripts of recordings, conversations between Holloway and various unnamed individuals, some in English, others translated from Spanish. The exchanges were filled with coded language and references to packages, deliveries, and mutual friends, classic espionage terminology. As the cataloguing continued, Jackson noticed his father's expression growing increasingly troubled. The evidence before them painted a complex picture. Either Richard Holloway had been conducting illicit meetings with foreign agents, or he had been building a case against someone else while posing as a willing participant. This is clearly an official intelligence archive, Donovan explained, as the final items were removed and documented. The question remains whether Holloway was securing it to protect an ongoing operation or hiding it to prevent his own exposure. And my grandfather's role? Robert asked quietly. Based on the materials we've recovered so far, Arthur Whitley appears to have been providing secure storage for these records, essentially serving as what we would now call a dead drop location, a trusted individual with no obvious connection to intelligence operations who could maintain sensitive materials away from official channels. Jackson thought about the package inside his jacket containing Arthur's personal papers. Would they reveal his great-grandfather's understanding of what he was hiding, his motivations for becoming involved? When can we expect all this to be removed from our property? Robert asked, his tone making it clear he was reaching the limits of his patience with the intrusion. The evidence recovery phase should be completed by tomorrow afternoon, Donovan replied. We'll maintain a security presence for at least 48 hours afterward as a precaution, but with reduced personnel. As they left the command tent, Jackson noticed several agents huddled around a communications equipment, their expressions tense. One approached Donovan, speaking in a low voice that nonetheless carried enough for Jackson to catch fragments. Perimeter sensors. Unauthorized vehicle approaching from the East Access Road. Donovan's demeanor shifted instantly from professional courtesy to alert authority. Mr. Mason, please return to the house immediately. We have a potential security situation developing. What kind of situation? Robert demanded, not moving. Probably. Nothing concerning, Donovan replied, his actions contradicting his reassuring words as he unholstered his sidearm and checked it discreetly. But as a precaution, I need you both inside where our team can ensure your protection. Agent Wilson appeared at their side, her normally composed expression betraying tension. This way, please, quickly but calmly. As they were escorted toward the house, Jackson glanced toward the eastern property line, where several agents were moving with purpose through the fields, weapons at ready positions. In the distance, he caught a glimpse of movement, perhaps a vehicle partially concealed by the tree line that marked their property boundary. Inside the farmhouse, Wilson directed them to the central hallway, away from windows. Please remain here until we verify the situation, she instructed, her professional, draining evident in her controlled tone. Is my wife safe? Robert asked suddenly. She's at work. Should someone warn her? We've maintained coverage of all family members, Wilson assured him. An agent is currently stationed near the hospital where she works. If necessary, she'll... be brought home under escort. The next 20 minutes passed in tense silence as they listened to the muted sounds of the FBI response outside, radio communications, vehicles repositioning, agents calling to each other across the property. Finally, Donovan entered, his expression grim, but his weapon holstered. "We've secured the perimeter," he reported. "Two individuals in an unmarked vehicle were attempting to access your property via the Eastern Fire Road. When challenged by our agents, they fled." "Were they caught?" Jackson asked. "No. They abandoned their vehicle approximately half a mile away and continued on foot through the state forest land that borders your property. We're coordinating with local authorities, but given the terrain, immediate apprehension is unlikely." "Who were they?" Robert demanded. Donovan hesitated before responding. The vehicle contained surveillance equipment and documentation, suggesting an interest in the materials we've recovered from your barn. Preliminary assessment indicates they may be associated with foreign intelligence services monitoring our investigation. The implication hung heavily in the air. Whatever Richard Holloway had hidden on their farm 50 years ago remained significant enough that foreign operatives would risk confronting FBI agents to access it. "Given this development," Donovan continued, "we're upgrading our security protocols. Effective immediately. Agent Wilson will remain inside the house at all times, and we're adding additional personnel to the property perimeter. I must also insist that you postpone any non-essential travel until we've fully secured the evidence and assessed the threat level." Jackson met his father's eyes, reading the silent communication there. Their planned meeting with Professor Holloway had just become considerably more complicated and potentially more dangerous. "Is my family in danger?" Robert asked bluntly. "We have no specific indication of threats against family members," Donovan replied with practiced caution. "However, the interest shown in these materials suggests their continued significance to certain parties. Our presence here is as much protective as investigative." After Donovan left to oversee the expanded security measures, Jackson and his father retreated to the kitchen, where they could speak quietly while Agent Wilson maintained a respectful distance in the living room. "This changes things," Robert murmured, keeping his voice low. "If foreign intelligence services are involved, meeting Holloway could be more complicated than we anticipated." "Or more necessary," Jackson countered. "The FBI clearly knows more than they're telling us. So might Professor Holloway. Between his insights and great-grandpa's papers, we might finally understand what's really happening." "And how exactly do you propose we get to Philadelphia with FBI agents watching our every move and foreign operatives potentially lurking in the woods?" Jackson considered this, his mind racing through options. "We need Mom. She's the one person who can come and go without raising immediate suspicions, since she's expected back from her hospital shift." Robert nodded slowly, his expression troubled but resolute. "I'll call her, but Jack, you need to understand, we're moving beyond simple curiosity into something potentially dangerous. These aren't just historical documents we're dealing with. They're still actively important to people willing to risk confrontation with federal agents." "I know," Jackson acknowledged, "but this is our family's history and our land being occupied by government agents. Don't we deserve to know the full truth about why?" As his father stepped away to contact Sarah, Jackson touched the package of Arthur Whitley's personal papers concealed inside his jacket, wondering what secrets they might reveal about his great-grandfather's involvement in what was clearly more than just a favor for a recuperating State Department official. Whatever Arthur Whitley had hidden beneath his barn had set in motion events that continued to resonate 50 years later, events that had now ensnared his descendants in what appeared to be an ongoing intelligence operation with international implications. Saturday evening arrived with a sense of heightened tension across Willowbrook Farm. The additional security measures implemented after the attempted intrusion had transformed the property into something resembling a military installation. Floodlights positioned at strategic intervals bathed the farmyard in harsh white light, eliminating shadows where intruders might conceal themselves. Agents patrolled the perimeter in pairs, their conversations reduced to terse radio communications. Inside the farmhouse, Jackson sat at the kitchen table with his parents, the contents of Walter Kemp's package spread before them. Agent Wilson had reluctantly granted them privacy after Sarah Mason insisted on family dinner without an audience, though Jackson suspected she remained within earshot in the adjacent living room. "These letters go back to 1945, Sarah whispered, handling the yellowed papers with reverence. "Right after my grandfather returned from Europe?" Robert nodded, examining a small, leather-bound journal. "And his war diary mentions OSS training in England before D-Day. Your grandfather wasn't just a soldier. He was specifically recruited for intelligence operations." The revelation added critical context to Arthur Whitley's later involvement with Richard Holloway. His OSS background explained why he might have been considered trustworthy for handling sensitive materials long after the war had ended. Jackson focused on the more recent correspondence, letters from the 1960s that might shed light on the Holloway connection. One envelope, postmarked Washington, D.C. in April 1968, contained a brief handwritten note on plain stationery. "Arthur, thank you for your continued discretion regarding our mutual friend's situation. The arrangement we discussed will remain in place for the foreseeable future. Some matters are best left undisturbed until certain political winds shift direction. Your service continues to honor the highest ideals of our nation. J.A. J.A., Sarah murmured. "Anyone recognize those initials?" Jackson shook his head, but his father's expression shifted subtly. There was a deputy director at the CIA in the late 60s named James Angleton. He was in charge of counterintelligence, notoriously paranoid about Soviet penetration of U.S. intelligence services. "How do you know that?" Jackson asked, surprised. Robert smiled faintly. "I minored in political science before switching to agricultural management. Cold War politics was a particular interest." Another letter, this one from July 1968, provided the most direct reference to Holloway. "Arthur R.H.'s materials have been properly secured as discussed. The contingency remains viable should circumstances require implementation. No documentation of your involvement exists in official channels. As agreed, compensation has been arranged through the usual agricultural subsidy channels. Your country remains in your debt. J.A." "Agricultural subsidies," Sarah said slowly. "My father always mentioned how fortunate they were to receive unusual government support during the late 60s when other farms were struggling." "A cover for payments," Robert concluded. "Compensation for providing a secure location for whatever Holloway was hiding." Jackson carefully examined a photograph that had been tucked among the letters. It showed Arthur Whitley standing beside a distinguished man he recognized as Richard Holloway, both in fishing gear beside a stream. A third man stood slightly apart, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. The casual scene belied what must have been a carefully orchestrated meeting. July 1968, Jackson noted, reading the date scrawled on the back. Right when Holloway was supposedly recuperating here. The most illuminating document was a single page, torn from what appeared to be Arthur Whitley's personal journal, dated August 17, 1968. J.A. confirms operation concluded successfully. R.H. has been extracted to secure location overseas pending. Resolution. Materials to remain in place indefinitely. No further contact expected or advised. I have done what my country asked of me, though the full truth may never be known. Some shadows must remain unilluminated for the greater light to prevail. Emma asked again about the barn restrictions, told her it's for safety. How long must we maintain this vigilance? J.A. suggests years, possibly decades, a heavy responsibility, but one I accepted knowingly. Extracted to a secure location, Jackson repeated. That doesn't sound like someone who resigned in disgrace. Under suspicion of espionage, and operation concluded successfully suggests whatever Holloway was involved in was sanctioned, not rogue activity, Robert added. Sarah gathered the papers with a troubled expression. So the FBI's narrative about my grandfather assisting a suspected spy doesn't align with his own records. He believed he was participating in an official operation, one important enough to maintain secrecy for decades. Which makes our meeting with Professor Holloway tomorrow even more significant, Jackson concluded. He might be the only person who knows what his father was really doing. Their conversation was interrupted by Agent Wilson's return. Despite her professional demeanor, Jackson detected heightened alertness in her posture. Mrs. Mason, Agent Donovan, would like to speak with you regarding your hospital schedule tomorrow. He's concerned about maintaining appropriate security during shift changes. Sarah nodded, carefully sliding the letters into her pocket before following Wilson from the room. Once she was gone, Robert leaned closer to Jackson, speaking in a near whisper. Your mother made arrangements through a colleague at the hospital. She'll leave for her shift as usual tomorrow morning, but her friend will clock in using her ID. Meanwhile, she'll drive us to Philadelphia in her colleague's car. The FBI won't be watching for a different vehicle, Jackson realized. Smart. We'll need to leave by 8 a.m. to reach the Liberty Hotel by noon. Pack what you need tonight, but keep it hidden. And memorize anything important from those letters. We can't risk bringing the originals. The sound of approaching footsteps ended their conversation. Sarah returned with a tight smile that communicated silent warning. Agent Donovan is requesting a property-wide security briefing with all family members. Apparently they've received some intelligence about potential further intrusion attempts. In the living room, Donovan stood before a hastily assembled situation map showing Willowbrook Farm and surrounding areas. Other agents were gathered, creating an atmosphere more appropriate to a military operation than a family farm investigation. Based on analysis of the abandoned vehicle and intelligence from other sources, we believe the individuals who attempted to access your property yesterday are associated with Cuban intelligence services, Donovan explained without preamble. This significantly elevates our security concerns. Cuban intelligence, Robert questioned skeptically. Why would they care about 50-year-old documents? The materials recovered from both the safe and footlocker contain evidence related to intelligence operations during a particularly sensitive period in U.S.-Cuban relations, Donovan replied. Recent diplomatic developments have created renewed interest in historical operations from that era. You keep mentioning these diplomatic developments without specifics, Jackson observed. What exactly has changed to make these old documents suddenly important? Donovan hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. There are ongoing negotiations regarding intelligence sharing arrangements between our countries. Historical operations with continuing implications could potentially impact these discussions. And Holloway's materials potentially compromise someone still influential in Cuba, Sarah concluded. That's one possibility, Donovan acknowledged. The surveillance photographs and operational notes recovered from the footlocker document meetings between Holloway and several individuals who later became senior officials in Cuban intelligence. Whether Holloway was recruiting them as assets or being recruited himself remains an open question, which is why you're concerned about our planned meeting with Professor Holloway, Jackson said, deciding direct confrontation might yield more information than continued subterfuge. Donovan's expression tightened. So you're still planning to pursue that meeting despite our advisement against it? We haven't decided, Robert interjected smoothly. But as the family most affected by this investigation, we believe we deserve fuller explanations than we've received so far. I understand your frustration, Donovan replied with practiced diplomacy. However, national security concerns necessarily limit what I can share. What I can tell you is that Michael Holloway has maintained controversial connections with Cuban academic institutions throughout his career. His interest in meeting with Jackson specifically after the discovery of these materials raises significant counterintelligence concerns. He's a history professor specializing in Cold War operations, Jackson countered. Of course, he'd be interested in documents related to his father's career. A professor who has traveled to Havana 12 times in the past decade and published articles suggesting American intelligence operations against Cuba were illegal and unethical, Donovan added pointedly. His objectivity regarding these materials is questionable at best. The revelation about Holloway's Cuban connections gave Jackson pause. Was their planned meeting a genuine attempt to understand family history, or was the professor pursuing his own agenda related to his father's complicated legacy? Regardless of your opinions about Professor Holloway, Donovan continued, the security situation necessitates certain precautions. We're implementing a full lockdown protocol effective immediately. No one enters or leaves the property without direct FBI escort until we've neutralized the potential threat. Lockdown, Sarah repeated incredulously. This is our home, not a military base. A temporary measure, Mrs. Mason. Your safety is our primary concern. And if we refuse, Robert challenged. Donovan's expression hardened slightly. Then I would be forced to pursue more formal measures, including potential emergency protective custody. I'd strongly prefer to maintain our cooperative arrangement. The implied threat hung in the air like a physical presence. Jackson exchanged glances with his parents, reading their matching expressions of carefully controlled outrage. Their plan to slip away quietly tomorrow morning had just become considerably more complicated. After the briefing concluded, the family retreated to the kitchen under the pretense of making evening tea. Their conversation remained deliberately mundane, focused on farm management and Emma's school activities, aware that every word might be monitored by the agents now stationed throughout their home. When Jackson finally retired to his bedroom, he found Agent Wilson conducting what she diplomatically called a security sweep of his personal space. Just a precaution, she explained, noting his expression. We're checking all potential entry points. Jackson nodded stiffly, watching as she examined his windows and closet before departing with a professional nod. Once alone, he carefully retrieved his backpack from beneath the bed, verifying that the small notebook where he'd copied key information from Arthur's letters remained hidden in the lining. Whatever tomorrow brought, he was determined to meet Professor Holloway and finally understand the truth behind the mysterious safe contents that had turned his family's life upside down. Sleep proved elusive that night. Jackson found himself repeatedly drawn to the window, watching the silent movements of FBI agents patrolling their property. Occasionally, he caught glimpses of Agent Donovan conferring with security team leaders near the barn, their serious expressions visible in the harsh floodlights. Whatever they feared might happen, it clearly extended beyond routine security precautions. Shortly after midnight, Jackson's door opened quietly. His mother slipped inside, finger to her lips in warning. She sat on the edge of his bed and spoke in a barely audible whisper. Change of plans. We can't wait until morning. They're implementing rotating checkpoints at all exit routes within the hour. She pressed a set of car keys into his hand. My colleague's car is parked at the Thompson property line, hidden behind their equipment, a shed. Your father has created a diversion set to trigger the North Field sensors in exactly 40 minutes. We're leaving now, Jackson whispered, adrenaline immediately flooding his system. Sarah nodded. Get dressed, dark clothes, nothing distinctive. Pack only what you absolutely need. I'll meet you in the cellar in 15 minutes. The entrance to the irrigation tunnel is still accessible behind the old wine racks. Irrigation tunnel. What? Your great-grandfather built it during the drought of '57, she explained quickly. It runs from our cellar to the creek bed at the Thompson border. The FBI doesn't know about it. It's not on any property maps because Arthur never filed the proper permits. Jackson stared at his mother in amazement. The quiet nurse he'd known all his life suddenly revealed depths of resourcefulness he'd never imagined. Mom, are you sure about this? The FBI said there might be foreign agents watching the property. Sarah's expression hardened with determination. This is our family, our history, and our farm. I won't have government agents or anyone else controlling our movement or dictating our understanding of my grandfather's legacy. Sometimes you have to break minor rules to uphold more important principles. She squeezed his hand. 15 minutes. Don't turn on any lights. After she departed, Jackson dressed quickly in dark jeans and a navy sweatshirt, filling his backpack with essentials, wallet, jacket, the notebook containing his notes on Arthur's papers, and Mr. Collins' book on intelligence operations. The whole process took less than 10 minutes, leaving him anxiously counting seconds until he could make his way to the cellar. The farmhouse creaked with familiar night sounds as Jackson navigated the hallway with practiced silence, avoiding the third stair that always groaned under pressure. In the living room, he glimpsed an FBI agent stationed by the front door, attention focused on monitoring equipment rather than potential movement within the house. The cellar door opened with a whisper of hinges that Jackson feared might alert the entire security team. But no response came. He descended into darkness, feeling his way down familiar steps until a tiny pen light flickered to life, revealing his parents waiting beside the ancient wine racks his grandfather had installed. Decades earlier. Good timing, his father murmured, already sliding the heavy shelving unit to reveal a narrow tunnel entrance Jackson had never known existed. Your mother's created a medical emergency requiring Agent Wilson's expertise. Should buy us at least 5 minutes before they realize we're gone. The tunnel was lower and narrower than Jackson had imagined, requiring them to proceed in a hunched position, splashing through several inches of stagnant water. The air smelled of damp earth and decades of disuse, but the passage remained structurally sound, another testament to Arthur Whitley's meticulous craftsmanship. Grandfather maintained this secretly for years, Sarah whispered, as they navigated the dark passage by the dim glow of a single flashlight. Said it was important to always have an exit strategy not found on official documents. He wasn't just a farmer, Jackson realized aloud. No, Sarah agreed. I'm beginning to understand he was much more. And I suspect Professor Holloway knows exactly what that entailed. After what seemed an eternity of uncomfortable crouching and careful steps, the tunnel began a gradual ascent. Robert, Professor Holloway, waited at a corner table, his eyes lighting with recognition as the Mason family approached. He slid a worn leather portfolio across the table. I've been waiting 50 years to return this, he said quietly. Your grandfather and my father weren't enemies. They were partners in one of the most successful counterintelligence operations of the Cold War. Inside lay photographs and documents revealing the truth. Richard Holloway had posed as a potential defector to identify Cuban double agents, while Arthur Whitley provided the secure location to preserve the evidence. Those men still hold power in Havana today, Holloway explained. That's why both governments want these records buried. 3 days later, After a tense negotiation with Agent Donovan, the Masons returned home to find their property finally cleared of FBI presence. The safe's contents were officially classified, but the family now understood their great-grandfather's true legacy. Arthur Whitley wasn't just a farmer, Jackson told Emma as they sat in the restored barn. He was a patriot who understood that. Sometimes the greatest service happens in silence. We hope you enjoyed this tale of family secrets and Cold War mysteries. If uncovering hidden history fascinates you as much as it does us, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next upload. We have something extra special coming tomorrow that you won't want to miss.